This is the No Bullshit Truth podcast, and I'm your host, Leslie Noble. I've been a therapist for close to 30 years, and I specialize in betrayal, relationships, and healing from trauma. And I'm so glad that you're here. So thanks for listening. Before we get started, though, I want to point out that this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for therapy, counseling, or professional mental health services. So listener discretion is advised, especially if discussions about relationships, trauma, or divorce are activating. Please seek support from a licensed professional for personalized guidance and someone that can hold space for you and your story. Thank you. And thank you so much for all the views. And I'm so sorry that I have not posted in a few weeks. My adult kids were actually in town. And so I've sort of made them the focus and kind of working in between. So it's been kind of busy around here. But today there's a question I get all the time because I work with a lot of singles. And one of the questions they give me after they've been betrayed or their marriage ends or they become widowed is, do relationships still work? What do I believe about marriage? And should I, have another relationship, or is it even worth it? Because it feels like there's so much drama and chaos right now surrounding dating and relationships. So I want to talk about all of that today. So let's get into it. So, do relationships still work? Do marriages still work? So to answer that honestly, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of background. And if you will allow me my nerd moment for just a minute, yes, I'm a total nerd. I just want things to be research-based and honest and true when I present things to you. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how marriage, where it came from and how it has evolved over the years and why people are struggling so much now and what it actually takes to make relationships and marriages to work where we are right now in our world. So marriage is ancient, thousands of years older, honestly, than any government, any religion, in any country. We've always been built for connection, being together, wanting that connection, longing for love, longing for someone to share your life with. But for most of human history, marriage wasn't really about love. It was about survival, economic survival. It was about property. It was about alliances, and it was about social order. Love was considered just too unstable of a concept to build someone's family or society on. And so for centuries, marriage was just no more than a business arrangement. And in some ways, it's still prudent to look at it as a business arrangement, which I'll talk about that later. But back then it was a business arrangement, a political strategy, a way to merge land or labor, and a method of securing ancestry and lineage. The idea of talking about romantic love was just optional. And honestly, sometimes even discouraged, and as crazy as that is. For a long time, marriage was simply declared by families or communities. There wasn't paperwork. There was no government involvement. In fact, the earliest recorded marriage, I looked this up, in the United States was issued back in 1639 in Massachusetts, colonial Massachusetts, before licenses and churches used what's called banns, BANNS, public announcements made 3 weeks in a row to ensure that the couple was eligible to get married and that no one objected. So back then, they considered objections really strongly. This was the first form of regulation, but I want to point out that it was not religious regulation. It was not governmental. It was the community that regulated marriage. Marriage licenses didn't appear for romantic reasons. They appeared for legal, social, and political control. They were created to keep official records for inheritance, property rights, and lineage. to verify identity, age, and to regulate social order, including who could marry and under what conditions. So the first marriage license, really the purpose was to ban interracial marriage. And I'm not sure that. You're welcome to go back and fact check me. But the first licenses created in the States was because they were afraid of interracial marriage. So they wanted to shift authority from the church to the state and wanted to be able to track public health and demographics. So it was the early 1900s. Every state required a marriage license, and marriage became fully secularized. It was no more about people just marrying for religious reasons. It was so that the government and the state could track demographics, could make sure there was no interracial marriages, and we have grown past some of that now. But that's the history of marriage. And so now that we fast forward 50 to 70 years, marriage has changed a lot. We've changed a lot in the thousands of years. People now marry later. Marriage rates have actually declined over the last few decades. Cohabitation has increased. More people are living together. Parenthood is no longer tied to marriages. People are having children and then deciding later whether they want to get married or not. Emotional expectations in marriages have skyrocketed. We now expect that one person that we marry to be our best friend, our lover, our co-parent, our emotional safe space, our intellectual equal, our financial partner, our healer, our soulmate. And that is a hell of a lot for one relationship to hold. And part of the reason I think that we're struggling so much, so just hang in there with me a minute, and I'm going to give you some really valid things to think about. But before that, I want to talk about the gray divorce. The gray divorce is people getting divorced in their 50s and 60s, and that is the area that we see skyrocketing. I even see that in my own work with people reaching out for couples therapy. It is more likely a couple that's in their 50s that have married 20, 30 years and are struggling. Divorce rates have rose steadily through the 20th century, peaked around the 1980s, and then actually started declining over the last 25 years if you look at divorce rates as a whole. But gray people 50 and older have seen a dramatic rise. So it's doubled, actually, in the 50s. The divorce rate has doubled in the 1990s. Divorce rates for adults 65 plus have tripled. Roughly 1 in 4 divorces today involve people over the age of 50 years old. Many of these marriages have been 20, 30, 40 years long. This is one of the biggest demographic shifts in modern relationships, is the gray divorce. So here's the reason. I've done some research on this, and then I kind of want to later kind of tell you my 2 cents about why this is happening. But people are living longer, number one. A 30-year marriage used to be a lifetime. People would be married 30 years, and then someone would pass away, and they would be widowed. Now it's more like the halfway point. Second, women have more financial independence than they had. Women no longer stay because they have to. They leave because they choose to. And when I think about my mom's generation, my mom's 80 years old. And in her time of being married in the 70s, she couldn't put her name on the mortgage. She couldn't have a credit card without her husband's permission. So it has changed dramatically for women over the years. And honestly, with economic conditions, women had to go back to work. Families were not making it on just one person's salary. And I also think the third reason is empty nest reveals the truth. Couples spend a lot of time focusing on raising kids, and sometimes they frankly neglect the marriage or the things that were barely holding it together, which was parenting, suddenly goes away. And then the last reason really is long-standing issues finally reach a breaking point. Decades of just emotional disconnection, unresolved conflict, lack of intimacy, and unaddressed resentment off its surface once life slows down. So people start to look at those things when the focus is no longer surrounded by having kids in the home. And fifth, I think people want meaning in their later years. The first half of your life, you're creating financial stability, you're building a family. And then the second half of your life is where you look at and you want more meaning and purpose, and you want your relationships to be meaningful. There's a growing desire for authenticity within relationships, companionship, and emotional fulfillment and personal growth. People are less willing to spend remaining decades in a relationship that feels stagnant or lonely. So, I'm going to talk about why we're struggling now, but before that, I want to also talk about some other things I've noticed as far as patterns about the things I'm seeing over and over and over again when people come into couples counseling. First, I want to say that I do believe 95% of marriages that are struggling can be put back together. And I know that's a strong number, but I firmly believe that if, and I'm going to put an if on it, both people are driving the bus together, meaning both people are willing to work on the marriages. The ones that don't work are when one person's willing to make the changes and the other person doesn't think there needs to be changes or is unwilling to make the changes. And that's where the disconnect is. I also think we're very, very influenced by social media currently in our culture, and I'm hoping as we grow and evolve that will become less true. I think social media has its purpose, and it's not lost on me that some of the work I do is on social media. I think it has a purpose. I think it can educate. I think it can connect us with people we wouldn't normally be connected with. But I also think it does a number on us of what we think is true and not true. And sometimes there are very harmful messages that we get about relationships, or just even about genders, about men and women, that influence how we see relationships that are completely damaging. And then the other issue is not having a vision for the relationship, not really talking about those things before you move in together, not talking about money, not talking about how you see parenting or how you want the house to feel when you come home. There's so many things that you need to be aligned with and compatible before you build a life together. And you have to have those hard conversations. And a lot of times we avoid those conversations because we see the potential and then we think, okay, I can work through this. Another is that we're afraid we're going to lose it. We have a lot of chemistry and connection to this person, but I promise you it's important to have those conversations because you're just kicking the can down the road. And you being the couple that's in therapy. And sometimes people get in therapy as soon as 1 year because they have not talked through, for example, finances. That's the biggest reason, people fighting over money. And then they get on the edge of divorce in their first year of marriage because they just don't see it the same way and can't get on the same page. Another reason I think that divorce is on the rise is that we are not on the same page about what relationships mean. I think the purpose of relationships are for us to grow and evolve. And what I see sometimes is one person is growing and the other person's stuck or refuses to grow. We should always be becoming. Life is not a human being a fixed identity. We should always be growing. We should always have a vision. Michael Beckwith says, and I know I've quoted this before, that pain pushes until the vision pulls. So having a vision for your own life, having a vision for your relationship, having a vision for your career, so important to moving in life. And you can always change direction, but having a starting vision is what pulls you forward. And then the last reason I think sometimes relationships are struggling right now is we can negotiate lots of things in a marriage. You can negotiate budgeting. You can negotiate how many times you have sex a week. You can negotiate whether you travel or whether you go out, or you can negotiate hobbies and friendships and how much time you spend together. You can negotiate those things. The thing that you cannot negotiate And this is the part I want everybody to hear because it is the absolute truth. You cannot negotiate character. You cannot negotiate character. You can't negotiate someone's values. Let me give you an example of how you cannot negotiate values. So if you believe fidelity in a marriage, you believe commitment is not interacting with people on social media of the opposite sex, not liking their pictures, if that to you is lack of integrity and then your partner thinks it's no big deal, it's hard to negotiate what integrity means for both of you. If honesty is important to you, then that also means being able to tell hard truths. And if you're telling your partner something they necessarily want to hear, then you're not going to be on the same thing with truth. I think looking at the core of who someone is and their character is very, very important. And I know in my own life, that's where I've gotten burned sometimes is we might be compatible in some areas, but we're not compatible at how we see relationships, and we're not compatible with what integrity means and aligned with our values. And those are very, very hard to negotiate. So I think sometimes, again, not having hard conversations before you commit to someone, it's very, very important. So we're struggling because gray divorce rates, it carries a lot of emotional weight for people because it's the fear of starting over, grief for decades being invested in something, your own adult children struggling with the shift, loneliness mixed with liberation, a deep desire to rewrite the final chapters of life. I don't think gray divorce is an impulsive decision. It's not reckless, but it's often the result of quiet suffering, finally reaching a point of truth. And the heartbreaking thing for me is that it doesn't have to get to that point if we're really to have those conversations. So why are we struggling now in relationships? Well, several reasons. First, we expect marriage to meet every emotional need. We expect marriage to meet every emotional need. I have this conversation with singles a lot about owning agency in your own life and this idea of being the CEO of your own life. So that if you do decide to get married, or you do decide to get remarried, or you do decide to be in a long-term partnership, it's icing on the cake. It is not everything. And what I mean by having agency over your own life is having a vision. And to me, people that don't have a vision, they're kind of scary because they're just floundering around and will get attached, or you will get attached to whoever gives you attention. When you have a vision for partnership, you have a vision for your finances, you have a vision for work and your purpose, then you're able to make better decisions. And actually, you will be a way better partner because you're going to have capacity. You're going to be able to meet them with being already fulfilled and whole on your own. And historically, marriage didn't carry that weight. And then the second, I wish I could highlight this part because really I should have said this first, is we lack relational skills. Here's the question I have people ask when they are deciding whether to stop dating someone, to stop not marry someone, whether they want to commit to someone and ask them to marry them. I always ask them, it's not, or say to them, it is not just about love. But the question becomes, here's the part I ask, does this person have the behavior and skills and that they are able to maintain a long-term partnership? Do they have relational skills? Are they able to communicate with you? Are they able to come back and repair and say when they're wrong? Are they able to regulate themselves in the middle of conflict? And are they able to attune to you? Do they listen? Do they negotiate? Are they willing to take adult responsibility for their lives? Those are the behaviors and skills that adults have. And if they don't have those behaviors and skills, the mistake we make is we say, well, that person has the potential. Make decisions based on what you see right now, the actions that you see right now, not what you think they might do, not what you hope they might do, but what they're showing you. And then another one is trauma and attachment wounds show up in intimate relationships. We each have to do our own part in healing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I think relationships can be a beautiful place to heal each other. But you have to have done a certain amount of work before you get with someone or work within your own trauma, or even have insight and be able to recognize it. Marriage exposes the parts of us that we have never healed. And Dr. Harville Hendricks, and he's a therapist from the 1980s, so that'll just show you how old I am. He came up with what's called imago therapy, which I think is still relevant and amazing today. But one of the things he says is that marriage and relationships are going to hold up a mirror to your childhood wounds. So, for example, if you're an overgiver, maybe growing up you had to earn love. And so then you, in your adult life, might become an overgiver or feel like you have to earn love. Or maybe if you grew up in a lot of chaos, then you might choose a partner where there's chaos. And can you break that pattern? Yes, absolutely, you can break that pattern. But that's working through that trauma and understanding how your nervous system works and understanding what it means to be in safe partnership, what an emotionally mature adult looks like. And then the last reason, or actually it's not the last reason, it's the fourth reason, we're overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed by modern life because it's fast, stressful, and disconnected. I didn't used to see this 10 years ago, but now people will come into therapy and the partner will say, we don't talk because they spend all their time on their phone. Or they're in a room and they're playing video games all the time. You cannot keep a relationship going if you are not connected. And I'm not talking about 24/7. Of course, you should be able to do some things on your own, but there should be times of connection where you're not on your phone, you're not watching the games on TV, where you're actually connecting with your partner. It's a balance, right? And so we see so much in social media that we're exhausted and we're not under-resourced, meaning we don't do things to fill up our own bucket. So then it becomes really hard to connect with your partner. So presence is something that has to be practiced in relationships. Another reason they don't work is because we don't repair well. We don't come back after we've hurt someone and repair it. Ruptures are normal in relationships. You're going to have conflict. And I always tell couples that stop being scared of conflict. I always tease them and tell them I'm going to get them a t-shirt that says, say the damn thing. Because a lot of times it's like, well, I didn't say it. And I don't know, it's been bothering me. And I'll ask them how long it's been bothering me for the last 10 years. It's like we've got to practice saying the damn thing in the room and knowing that our partner who loves us and is committed to us can handle it. Accountability is important in a relationship, meaning I'm accountable to you and you're accountable to me. And some of that's going to cause conflict. And also, though, is having empathy for someone, being able to meet them and hold space for them, having emotional safety in a relationship, that I can be myself. I don't have to show up as my perfect self, but we can work on our vision and what our goals are together, and trust where we are and trust that we can rebuild. And I would say most couples have no idea what it means to repair and have no idea what it means to come back and repair. And I always remind couples, remember that you are a team. Both of you, you're a team. Meaning that it's not you against them and them against you. It is not you versus them. It is we are a team and we are in this marriage together. So if you have a problem with this relationship or something's bothering you, then it's a problem for me too. Kind of seeing that marriage as this separate entity, this separate vision that we're working on together, where we can have that place of honesty and stability. So, do I think relationships still work? Hell yes. But it's when people work them. And sometimes we will work really hard in our career, and we will work really hard on parenting our children, and we leave and neglect our marriages, or we neglect our relationships. And you have to put the same work that you would put in a marriage. I know that's not what people want to hear, but if you want a good marriage, you have to put work into it. If that's something you value and is important to you, maybe it isn't. Maybe you're fine with status quo, but I would say that you're missing out, because I've seen people that have really good marriages. I witnessed one. My grandparents had an amazing marriage, and they were married for 60 years, almost 60 years. My grandfather went off to war, and my grandmother, back then, they didn't have cell phones, so he wrote her a series of letters. And later in my life, I had the privilege of reading those letters. And she was in a terrible car accident, and he stayed with her through the whole thing. The last half of her life, she was probably my age when she was in the terrible car accident, and she could hardly walk. She was in chronic pain. She had to have back surgery after back surgery. She couldn't work anymore, and he still loved her the same as the day he met her. So yes, there are love stories that exist like that. Not the movie kind. I'm talking about the reality kind. So repairing the struggle that we have in relationships, and repairing conflict and all the things that come up in marriage, really, I'm going to break it down for you. It requires 7 things. And one is emotional regulation. You cannot build connection from a dysregulated nervous system. So what I mean by emotional regulation is you're not yelling at each other and calling each other bitch and asshole and throwing the phone across the room, punching holes in walls. One of the questions I always ask when a couple is struggling with this, and their faces kind of look at me, is, do you do this at work? And there's always a long pause of no. And what are the consequences if you were to do that at work? Well, I'd lose my job. The consequences of not working on emotional regulation is you will lose your relationship. You will lose your marriage, because those things pile over time. And if you can emotionally regulate yourself at work, which is also can be a really stressful environment, you can emotionally regulate yourself in your relationship. You're just choosing not to. And that is hard for people to hear, but it is absolutely the truth. If you cannot control your temper, take a breath and go for a walk. Take a breath and separate yourself, and then when you're calm, come back in a dysregulated way and repair and have those conversations. So that one I would say is the most important, and one I really, really want you to deeply think about. The next one is consistency over intensity. So we are used to novelty in our society. We want the quick fix, and we even do it for eating, right? We go through McDonald's because we want the quick fix. And relationships are not DoorDash. We can't put in an order and this person's going to fulfill all our needs, and I'm going to know within 2 days whether you're the one. I want you to concentrate on consistency over intensity. I'm going to say it again, consistency over intensity. Does this person show up the same way? Meaning, are they truthful? Are they there when things are kind of boring? Relationships are not always exciting, and unfortunately what we do is we chase the feeling instead of the relationship or the feeling of going deeper with someone. Trust is built through those small, repeated behaviors, not grand gestures. And the other thing, as Maya Angelou used to say or said, is when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And that's what we don't do, right? We give someone the benefit of the doubt and the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of the doubt, until we just can't. Everybody's got their own bullshit. We all do. That's why I hate the word red flags, because we all have them. I mean, we all have red flags. We all have been through things, or things that have challenged us, things that have hurt us, times where we have felt betrayed. We all have wounds from school, from childhood. We just think we're not the same in that way, and I can promise you that we are. But does your bullshit match their bullshit, or can you live with their bullshit? Really is what the question becomes. Not because one person may be able to deal with somebody's lack of patience, whereas another person, it sends them over the edge. So can I deal with this person's, who they show me that they are? Another one is transparency. Being honest about what your fears are, what your needs are, what your mistakes are, and being honest about and transparent about who you are as a person. A lot of times we've not even done identity work, and then we get in a relationship and we have no idea who we are, so we become that other person. I mean, it happens all the time. We've all done it. But really being transparent about who you are and what you can do and what you can't do, being transparent over time about your past. I mean, I don't want you to go out on the first date and trauma dump. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about understanding each other on a deeper level and being transparent, not covering things up. Another one is shared responsibility, both people owning their parts without blame. It's not a shame game. It's not a blame game, but it's about taking accountability and saying, I'm sorry, I know that hurt you, and I will not do it again. If you want to know if someone's sorry, you'll see changed behavior. You won't see the same pattern over and over and over again. And then repair skills, which I mentioned above. Ruptures in relationships are inevitable. You're going to have them. And repair is absolutely optional. But it's a difference between a relationship that lasts and relationships that collapse, because resentment build up over time, which is why we're having the gray divorce. We've never worked through resentment, or when we've tried to, we're met with defensiveness. And that's the part of accountability, personal accountability, that you have to work on, is someone talking to you and being transparent without you being defensive, because you're not listening when you're being defensive. Rebuilding friendship is important. Having a friendship, the best marriages have friendship first. They're warm with each other, they're curious, they laugh, and they have genuine interest in who the person is. I've had people that I've worked with over the years that have been married, or just even friendships where I've seen people married, and I think to myself, do you even like each other? Because I think that's really important, is that you like the person they are, and you like how you feel when you're with them. And the other thing that makes relationships work is choosing each other daily, not out of obligation, but with intention. There could be somebody around the corner that's more attractive than the person you're with, has a better body, makes more money, maybe, but you're choosing each other. And that's where the integrity comes from, because love is a choice. I choose you. And I think that's what my grandfather did when my grandmother had the accident, is he chose her with intention. And it wasn't an obligation, because he said, I choose you, and I choose you every day for the rest of my life. So do I think relationships still work? Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely yes. But they're not easy. And that's the part that we want. We want the romantic movie. We want the plot line. We want the prince that comes in and saves us. But relationships are not going to be perfect. And they're not going to fulfill every need you have. And relationships work because we're wired for connection. And we are capable of extraordinary growth when we choose to show up for each other. I've watched couples rebuild trust after betrayal. I've watched marriages come back on the brink when one person's walking out the door. I've watched partners learn to communicate, regulate, repair, and reconnect. It does work. I've watched love deepen in ways that are more powerful than they had in the beginning. But here's the part that's important to understand. Relationships don't work because they're magical. They work because people become intentional, accountable, emotionally present, and willing to grow. So yes, love still works. Marriage still works. Connection still works, but only when we do the work. See you next time.